Thank you, Mr. Prasad, Ms. Jain, my fellow panelists, friends. It's really an honor to be here to talk about infrastructure financing from an innovative financing point of view. And it's really an honor to receive a certificate, a tree certificate, that actually is going to result in planting of some trees in India. For me, since I live so far away, it's almost impossible to plant trees in India by myself. And this is really a very noble and nice gesture, very innovative gesture as well. What I'll do is to sort of share some thoughts on innovative financing instruments and ideas, some that are already in practice and some that are not yet in practice, that can be applied to the Indian context. And in doing that, I'll try to sort of motivate why those instruments are going to be useful. But I'm not going to be talking about the very specific aspects of the instruments. I'll give you the broad picture so that you can think about applying one or the other when you are thinking about infrastructure financing, or for that matter, financing of any kind of projects that you might have needs for. So I'll use a PowerPoint just to hopefully crystallize some of the messages that I want to convey. And then later on, I can take some questions if there are questions. The outline of my presentation would be first to talk about just a relationship between credit ratings, credit worthiness, and borrowing costs, which is in essence, which is the essence of any decision to go for financing, as you all know. Then I'll talk about three specific instruments: diaspora bonds, future flow securitization, and performance indexed bonds. I hope it wouldn't be too difficult to understand. I don't think it should be. So let me try to see if I can convey my thinking this morning. If you are undertaking a project, whether it is infrastructure project or whatever else, the rate of return must be high enough to cover the cost of financing. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. Often in India, we have a tendency to completely move away from debt. We don't like borrowing. We have had horrible experiences in the past with borrowing at a personal level, at the level of the country, and we have a tendency to shrink away from debt. But debt is not necessarily bad. We also know that. The key is the rate of return is high enough to cover the cost of the debt. The maturity pattern, the currency mismatch, they ought to be properly covered. So with that sort of prudential debt management in mind, it always helps to have a lower cost of borrowing and a longer maturity for the borrowing. And in that process, the credit worthiness matters a lot. And if you go down from the credit rating, let's say A, AA, all the way down to C, then the borrowing cost rises exponentially. And in fact, if you are fairly highly creditworthy, borrowing costs are rather low. If you go down, your credit rating goes down, the borrowing cost rises very fast. So it is not proportionate. It is not it's like straightforward line, but it is actually an exponential curve. So the difference in borrowing cost between B minus and B is much higher in terms of interest rate than the difference between A minus and A. It's the same sort of difference in ratings, but the cost of borrowing is very high when you are in the lower end of the rating spectrum. There is also that investment grade threshold where costs can be suddenly very high if you fall below the investment grade threshold. In the typical jargon of the rating agencies, triple B minus is sort of the investment grade threshold. And that jump, that fall in that increase in borrowing cost is about 100 to 130 basis points. That is more than 1 percentage point if you fall below the investment grade threshold. What that means is that if it is not that expensive somehow to go from just below investment grade to just above investment grade through some kind of mechanism, then that effort, the cost of doing that might be eminently justifiable in terms of in terms of the fall in interest costs. That's what the chart shows. There is the investment grade threshold, borrowing costs suddenly rise from somewhere around 30 basis points for a triple B minus to somewhere around 130, or in the year 2003, that was over 200 basis points. 1 basis point is 100, 100 basis points is 1%, right? So that's the motivation for financial structuring. Because borrowing costs rise exponentially, and because at the investment grade threshold, there is a sharp jump in interest cost, if somehow you are able to move your rating, your credit worthiness higher and higher, you will get better and better benefits in terms of lower borrowing costs. If you have lower borrowing costs, then you can justify a lot of projects. You can then take risks in terms of project, and then you are able to transfer your attention more towards the project risk rather than the financing part of it. That is a key message that I wanted to leave with you today. With that in mind, then we are going to try to think about how we can improve creditworthiness of a borrower or a project. So the first thing is not so much about existing instruments, but I'm going to talk a little bit about a new instrument, which you are probably familiar with, all of you. That instrument is a diaspora bond. We made up that word now. We're not talking about connections with the diaspora. We are also talking about that, but actually we're talking about a bond, a real instrument that can be sold to the diaspora. And India has done that before. The Resurgent India bond, the India Millennium Deposits are examples of the diaspora bonds, but they were not the right way to do it. They had the essence of it, but they were done wrongly. And I think Pratibha might be able to tell you why they were wrong, because they were not registered with the SEC. And the US SEC colleagues, when I talk to them there, they're quite annoyed with that bond actually, even now. So diaspora bond is a financing instrument at a retail level that can be sold to diaspora members or friends. It need not be limited only to the diaspora members, but here is a reason why you would want to do that. As the minister earlier pointed out, India received over $70 billion in remittances this year, in the last year, 2013. And projections are that because of the weakening of the rupee and the other schemes to attract diaspora investments and deposits, remittances are going to surge this year. So we're talking about over $70 billion in remittances again in 2014, that is per year. At that rate, by the way, remittances are larger than IT exports now. Now, whatever amount diaspora members, migrants from India send home every month or every year, a larger amount they save in the country of destination, wherever they are. And that larger amount typically is saved in the bank deposits in sums of $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, depending on the person. They are saved in bank deposits that are getting about 0% interest rate now. If we were to give 4% interest rate in dollar terms or 3% interest rate in dollar terms, then diaspora members would be very willing to invest in those instruments, in the diaspora bond, and we would then be able to raise a much larger amount than the 70 billion, let's say. I don't think it will be per year, but you are talking about enormous sums of money that can be raised through diaspora bonds. A few reasons why that would be so. First, an institutional investor would benchmark India's credit and the infrastructure project's credit of the LIBOR, the London Interbank Offered Rate, and then add a country spread, a risk spread. For the diaspora investor, the benchmark is 0, the deposit rate. And then for the diaspora investor, the country risk perception is much lower than for the institutional investor. First, because the devaluation risk perception has to be lower, because they can use the rupees here if necessary, right? So that is one reason. So for rational reasons, the spread can be lower. On top of that, there is a patriotic reason. I would love to see the trees that the FICCI colleagues are going to plant. I would love to see a road that leads to my village. I would love to see a bullet train between Bombay and Ahmedabad, Bombay and Delhi, all the metropolitan cities, including some of the secondary cities. Distances here are great, but they're not that great compared to the technology that is available now. Yes, funding requirements for bullet trains are huge, but invest in a bullet train, invest in airports, diaspora members would be very willing to come in large numbers. And that kind of funding could be raised through diaspora bonds. Of course, in addition to some other things, you can think about some other ways of risk mitigation as well. So that's in general the diaspora bonds. And we are talking about 20, 30, 40 billion dollars a year that could be raised through diaspora bonds. So that is the first sort of instrument I wanted to talk about. Israel is an example of diaspora bonds. They have been doing it since 1951. And here is an example of the patriotic discount. If you see the red line, that is the interest rate that Israel has been paying on the diaspora bond, the Israel bonds. And the yellow line, the US Treasury rate, that shows you sort of the market rate. And you can see diaspora was willing to invest, is willing to invest in Israel's diaspora for a much lower rate. You know that from the Resurgent India bond experience as well. These days, if you want to go to the market with a diaspora bond, my sense is you're talking about a 4% financing, perhaps even 3% financing in dollar terms, 5-year maturity. So that's my first instrument. Let me talk a bit about the second instrument, the future flow securitization. If you again go back to the relationship between rating and spread, as I said, if you are able to improve the rating somehow, the spread, the borrowing cost would go down significantly. So with that in mind, are there ways in which we can improve the credit rating or lower the borrowing costs by ourselves without having to go to the government? That is the idea. And here is a simple idea. If I am going to a lender and I say I need to borrow, and the person says, do you have a car? Then I say, yes, I have a car, or I have a house, and I mortgage it, then my borrowing cost goes down. If I don't have an existing asset, but I have an idea, a brilliant idea, for example, a movie that somebody like Steven Spielberg makes, there is a track record that Steven Spielberg has, but he has not yet made the movie. He needs the money before he makes the movie. He could actually think about creating a special purpose vehicle and then using the future revenue that would come from that, from that movie, use the present value of that as collateral and borrow against that. That's the idea of the future flow securitization. And the way it would work is that, okay, there is a foreign buyer for an export, whether it is movies or whether it is oil exports, whether it is remittances coming from outside, whether it is exports of fuel, some mining exports. There are airline receivables that can be securitized, tourism receivables that can be securitized, credit card vouchers that can be securitized. So Visa, MasterCard, they actually do it. The idea is there is a foreign buyer, there is a local exporter. So the local exporter is, let's say, India, and there is a foreign buyer, whatever that product it is. You create an SPV offshore and basically channel the money through the SPV, and the SPV, the special purpose vehicle, issues the bond. That itself, through some other structuring, collateralization and other structuring, you can bring down cost significantly. That, in essence, is the idea. So you could actually do that also with remittances and what is called diversified payment rights. I'm not going to go into the details, but there are examples of that out there. This future flow securitization market, I think by now must be about $40 billion or larger. The remarkable thing about future flow securitization is that there, I don't think has been even now a case of default yet. There have been defaults with all sorts of bonds, but not with future flow securitized bonds. And that is a prime, I think, from an infrastructure point of view, from India's point of view, that's a really potentially attractive financial instrument that we can think about. This can be used because cost of securitization has fallen significantly over the last 20 years. Since 1987, this is going on. Since 1987, future flow securitization tools have been used. Because of the track record, cost of structuring has fallen significantly. And because of that, you don't need to go out now to raise only 100 million or 1 billion or 10 billion. You can also do it for smaller amounts. My sense is that you could actually justify a securitization deal, future flow securitization deal, for financing as little as 25 or 30 million. because the costs have fallen, cost of investment banking has fallen. So there are examples of that. There are, of course, there is a hierarchy for that. Crude oil type receivables, fuel receivables are at the top of the hierarchy. They're much more easy to securitize in some ways, future flow securitize. There is a diversified payment rights and foreign remittances, airline ticket receivables, telephone receivables, credit card vouchers that come in second. And then, I mean, there are a number of other things, and Argentina even experimented with, Argentinian provinces experimented with securitization of tax revenue that they would get every year from the central government. That can work here as well, but I wouldn't go that far. Okay. Finally, this is my final instrument that I want to propose, and this has not been done anywhere. This is called the performance indexed bond. So think back to the bullet train. Suppose you form a company to start a bullet train from Bombay to Ahmedabad, and then you say, if the passenger traffic in 4 years' time is so much, whatever the target is, let's call it 6 in my diagram, then I'll give you that much interest rate. So this is the performance. If my performance is 6, I'll give you an interest rate. The coupon is about 8. That's the base. If my performance exceeds 6, then there'll be a formula, and according to that formula, I'll give you a higher interest rate. If my performance goes below that, then I'll give you a little lower interest rate. So this is a semi-debt, semi-equity type instrument. There has been a class of that is the GDP indexed bond that was issued by Argentina. It did not work because Argentina produces the GDP number, so nobody trusted that performance indicator. But I can imagine if you do that bullet train example and you get the international auditors to come and certify the performance, and the performance is well defined and the contract is already pre-specified, this kind of instrument could work. And that is something to consider together with perhaps future flow securitization, together with diaspora bonds, together with plain vanilla bonds, together with guarantees, PPP, all kinds of possibilities are there. But this is an instrument that has not been thought about. And I think this would be useful to consider. So with that, let me mention a couple of things about migration and I'll stop. Indian migrants, we always think about them as, depending on who we are, where we are, we always think about migration from India is only to, let's say, the Gulf, or only to UK, or only to US. But actually, it is really widespread. So if you are thinking about mobilization of, let's say, revenue from diaspora bonds or marketing projects, they are all over the world. We should not forget them, that they are literally everywhere in the world. That is basically the end of my presentation. There is a book that I did a while ago called Innovative Financing for Development, which has some of these ideas specified in greater details. And finally, there is a global knowledge partnership that we have started in the World Bank on migration and development. One of the themes there is innovative financing, mobilization of financing by leveraging migrants or leveraging diasporas. So there is that activity going on. Thank you very much.